Thank you everyone for joining us today. I am, as he said, from Monarch Watch at the University of Kansas, and I am, we are on the campus of KU. We are the Jayhawks, the mighty Jayhawks here. And so I'm gonna just go ahead and dive in here. Monarch Watch was started by Chip Taylor. He is the director of Monarch Watch, and he has been working with this organization since 1992. He started out as a bee guy, and he assumed the role of running the Eastern tagging program. Tagging monarch butterflies began by Fred Urquhart, and he started tagging in the 1940s and was working on finding new ways to tag monarch butterflies. You can see right here on this wing of this butterfly he's holding in his hand, there is one of his tags, and he discovered that tag while he was exploring the area with a National Geographic magazine team, which was a really great coincidence. They were able to actually photograph him holding the first monarch that was discovered. It was originally tagged in Minnesota by a group of school children. We are continuing that program. We have volunteers right now, including the staff of Monarch Watch, stuffing these envelopes full of monarch tags. This is tagging season right now. It begins in the north and progresses in more southern latitudes. So we haven't actually started tagging here in Kansas, but people up in Canada have an opportunity to tag earlier than we do. This is a group of people that it's a family of one mother and her children who come and help us organize all of our stuff every year. They bring snacks, and right now they're doing it from home because of the buildings being shut down. But we really appreciate all the volunteers that we have who help us. We also have people who help us with data entry once those tag data sheets start coming in. And here you can see a girl who has just released a monarch butterfly. You can see the tag on the wing. You can see that also it has changed positions. Dr. Fred Urquhart's tags were up on the forewing up here, which probably increased a little bit of the drag on the wing because that's the part of the wing that hits the air first. This wing down here is used more like a rudder. And so the hind wing is a better position for monarch tags. And a lot of people of different ages can participate in this program every year. And you can purchase those tags from us by going to our Monarch Watch shop. And I will show you some website places to get those kinds of things later in this talk. But what is one of the things that is really important about this program is that it not only is contributing to science, but it's contributing to the love of nature and connecting children and even adults to an insect, which isn't really, insects are usually a very popular animal for people to connect with. And so it's a great way for people to connect with an insect and learn more about conservation. So a lot of you probably want to know a little bit more about the migration. This is a pretty popular migration map that Monarch Watch produced. One of the things that recently came out on our blog was Dr. Taylor has produced a blog that describes 4 migrations, and I'm just going to summarize that blog post here. The monarch butterfly doesn't just take one big migration to the overwintering sites in Mexico, which were shown, and I'll show that map again. It has one big migration of monarchs that come, that everyone are familiar with, that go down south to the overwintering sites. But let's start in the spring. So in February to late April, the monarchs leave the overwintering sites. The migration starts to reach Texas in the 2nd week of March. And those females that are gravid, which is another word for pregnant in insect terms, they will lay their eggs and mate and lay more eggs until they eventually die. By May, most of those are dead. And by this map, you can also see that some of them make it up into, in the springtime, some of them make it up into some of the more northern areas. We sometimes get to see some of the migrants from Mexico up in Kansas. but you will not see migrants from Mexico up in these more northern latitudes unless an unusual weather event occurs, which does happen on occasion. Unfortunately, those females that are looking for milkweed will not find it that early in the spring. So the nice thing about this system is that it has evolved with the emergence of milkweed. So the milkweed will emerge first in Texas, Louisiana, Oklahoma. That's where they first land and lay their eggs. So the second migration that we see is in mid-April, mid to late April. Those offspring that are coming from those monarchs that passed away in May are, they're going to become mature and then start migrating northeast. In early June, all of that directional flight will be done, and that second migration will be over. So by then, the monarchs will have reached all of those northern latitudes that we are looking at them in these northern areas. So they will come all the way up to Manitoba. I am only going to be focusing today on the eastern migration, but as you can see, there's another cycle of monarchs over in the western part of the United States that go from California back up into the desert Southwest and other parts of the country. There's some really interesting research going on over in the Southwest where they're discovering that some of these monarchs that are tagged in those areas are being recovered in the overwintering sites, but some of them are also being recovered on this coastline over here. So let's look at that migration over here on the eastern part of the United States. So that third migration, the one that, well, actually, I'm jumping ahead of myself. So this is an unusual thing that not a lot of people are familiar with. This third migration is south and southwestern directional flight that starts for some but not all monarchs. And so some people will start to see monarchs moving in a migratory pathway, and they start to populate areas like Georgia and Texas that were not seeing monarchs so much during the summer. So in that third week of August, that is approximately about when that migration will end, but it's not something that is fully understood. So we do see that kind of directional movement, but it's early on and it's not that last generation either. So that isn't represented on this map. Right now we've seen the first generation come up here, lay eggs in the spring, they come up here in the summer. That's the second migration. The third migration we're not seeing on this map, but the fourth migration is on here, and that is that group that goes to the overwintering site. So in early August, the longest migration of all of them is during this time. And it is different from the other three migrations. And I will talk a little bit more about this later. But these butterflies are not mating and reproducing. They're saving energy so that they can conserve it the entire span of the winter. Those butterflies that are migrating are also have a longer lifespan. They're not reproducing when they're in the overwintering sites either. So during this time of this migration, Monarch Watch has got volunteers all over the country who are tagging these butterflies. And this is an example of a tag that was found in Mexico at what hadn't quite reached the overwintering sites yet, but it was photographed as a live butterfly. And it was pretty exciting because you could see how far that butterfly traveled. In a straight line, it traveled 1,602 miles. But we all know that butterflies don't travel in a straight line, so it must have gone much farther than that. And we can track that tag. One that was tagged by Linda Code on September 17th was recovered in Mexico on October 31st. So we can tell about how fast that butterfly traveled and kind of estimate what kind of route it might have taken. So once they get into those overwintering sites, you can see here in this photograph, the area that's outlined in red is approximately the area that's covered in monarch butterflies. And you can tell the color of the trees is slightly different. There's a rusty orange color in those trees. That is where the butterflies are so populated in those areas that they're actually changing the color of the trees to orange. And this kind of aerial photography is what is used to create these graphs. So a lot of times you might hear in the news that monarch butterflies have been reduced in population size by so many million. Well, we don't actually know the numbers of monarch butterflies that are in those overwintering sites. All we know is that we have an area that they have covered, and it's usually measured in hectares. So let's go back to that picture. We don't know the density of the monarchs that are in this area. We don't know how many are actually there. We just know that they're appearing to cover that amount of space. So you can see there has been a steady decline since we began taking these kinds of measurements. Unfortunately, these kinds of measurements were not taken before 1994. So we don't really actually know what the population looked like before that. We only have guesses. Nobody was in the air taking aerial photographs. There were people on the ground who were, you know, have a relative ideas of what the population sizes were. We know that the population has declined. This was a picture that was taken by a friend of mine, Brad Gurr, who lives in Heston, Kansas, and he was able to put this picture on the Journey North website. So if you happen to also observe monarchs in your area, you can go to Journey North and you can put your photographs, or even without photographs, you can record your sightings of monarch butterflies on Journey North. And I will put that website up later. But one thing that we know about monarchs is they cannot live without milkweed plants. So the females will hunt down the milkweed in the areas that they end up. They don't automatically innately know where milkweed will be. They just go where the signals of the environment tell them to go in the spring, and then happen to go find it in their environment. So one of the things that's important about the relationship between milkweeds and monarchs is that milkweed is providing a service to the monarchs, not only just the food, but also the toxins within the system of the milkweed plants. Those toxins are carried by the adults and act as a protection against predation. There are a lot of other butterflies that have adapted the ability to consume plants that are toxic, and a lot of those other butterflies have mimics, such as the monarch does with the viceroy butterfly, which looks very much like a monarch. And basically the idea behind this, evolutionarily speaking, is that if a butterfly looks like a monarch, it doesn't necessarily have to taste like a monarch. If a bird has eaten it, has an experience with consuming a monarch butterfly, and you may be familiar with this image from textbooks that were produced in the 70s and 80s, generally had this image in it, and the reaction of the bird when it eats a monarch butterfly is that it vomits. The idea is not to kill the bird. The butterfly is dead, however, but the bird will remember that color pattern on the butterfly and will have learned a lesson. So on with the monarch biology, we have monarchs are either, as I said earlier, migratory or reproductive. When I'm talking about migratory now, I'm talking about that fourth migration. The ones that are in that fourth migration, they are non-reproductive butterflies. They haven't actually developed, hormonally speaking and physically speaking, they haven't developed adult characteristics for sexual reproduction. So the ones that are non-reproductive have a 6 to 8 month lifespan during that time when they are migrating south and living in Mexico, and then have to move back up north to mate and reproduce. And that's when their lifespan ends. The ones that are reproductive in the summertime live only 2 to 6 weeks. So it's a really fascinating life cycle that these butterflies have. The life history of monarchs changes depending on the time of year. And also, they are not able to survive the winter, and so that's why they're migrating to the areas in Mexico where they live. They're not migrating there to stay warm though. They're migrating there to stay above freezing. So the mountains that they're moving into do experience weather events sometimes that include this one that killed a lot of butterflies right as they were moving out. Now remember that timeline is about the end of February, they're starting to move back up north. And so this happened near the end of the group of migrants that were coming up out of the forests in Mexico. We had a big storm that knocked down trees. So that was very unfortunate. One of the things that we need to remember, and one of the things that a monarch way station has as a requirement, is that monarchs don't just need milkweed, they also need nectar plants for those adult butterflies. So I've got a few tips here for growing these nectar sources. One of the things that we like to encourage people to do is plant native nectar sources, because those could also supply, be a host plant for another species. So New England asters, for example, are very popular fall blooming plant that provides great nectar sources for those butterflies that are building up all the resources that they need to overwinter. It also is the host plant of the pearl crescent butterfly, which is a non-migratory butterfly that's native to our most of North America. So Monarch Watch has, this is our website, and I'm just going to give a little tour of the important parts of it. One of the things that I do as part of my job is I manage the milkweed market. We do sell milkweed. If anybody needs to buy, it has to be in an entire flat of milkweed, but you can go in with friends and neighbors and purchase those together. Also, we have a program of free milkweed. So people who are associated with nonprofit organizations, such as the Museum of History there, or schools, can receive free milkweeds from Monarch Watch, also in flats of 32 for their monarch habitat. And then we also have a shop, and on our shop you can participate in our Monarch Waystation program through that, and you can also get your tags for your tagging program there. And of course, we love it for people to donate to Monarch Watch to keep our programs running. One of the things that is often missed, and I'm going to show you later, hopefully if I have time, a website that gives you a great list of plants. The plants that are on this site are for different parts of the country, and then we have our migration and tagging program links here. So these are some plant lists that you can go to. This is the Monarch Watch plant list here that I referred to on our website, but Pollinator Partnership also has great pollinator flowering plant guides for different areas of the country, as does the Xerxes Society. This is being recorded, so hopefully you'll be able to go back in, and if you don't have time to write this down right now, you can go back into that archive and get those websites down. So Monarch Watch has, since the beginning of the Waystation program, I haven't actually updated this number. We're probably over 28,000 at this point, but we have a lot of waystations in the country. Once you get a Monarch Waystation, it's yours for life. We even let people move with their Monarch Waystations if they sell a property and need to create it elsewhere. You can take your Waystation status with you. This is what the Monarch Waystation looks like in my backyard right now, where I'm working at KU. We have a group of master gardeners who work with us to get their master gardener points by coming to our Waystation and helping to maintain it, and it looks amazing. The plant that you see right in front of you there is common milkweed. This is a close-up of common milkweed, which is a great pollinator plant. Bees and butterflies alike, as well as wasps and flies, will get the nectar from these plants. I've even seen a few beetles using their resources. So this is a famous plant for a lot of gardeners because it's been in the nursery industry for a while. Sometimes it is sold as a white variety. Asclepias incarnata is also called swamp milkweed, and the cultivars are sometimes called Cinderella or ballet. And then this is a very popular one as well in the nursery trade, Asclepias tuberosa. So if you are looking for milkweeds, these are 3 great options for your area. They're all natives, and I want to stress though that when you're purchasing milkweed, make sure you ask the people who are selling it if they know what kind of pesticides were used on the plants. Almost all milkweed is grown with some kind of deterrent for aphids, because aphids love. If I have time, I'll show you a picture of aphids in this slides. But aphids love milkweed. There's a special kind of aphid called the oleander milkweed, oleander aphid, sorry. It also gets on oleander plants, but those are native to another country, and we don't often see them around here. But so we get these oleander aphids on the plants, and they have to be treated if the plants are going to stay healthy for sale. But if they're treating them with systemic pesticides, that's no good for the monarchs. So try to stress with anyone who's selling any of these species that they do not use systemic pesticides, because those pesticides actually get into the tissues of the plant and stay there for long term and affect any kind of hosts that might use those plants for food, including monarch butterflies. One of the things that I hope I could click on this and not mess everything up, but I'm going to click on this. I'm going to go to the Biota of North America plants, and we can see the distribution of milkweeds in the United States. Now, if you can't see this on your screen, you may not be able to because I didn't share that part. Just go there and check it out. It's pretty interesting. If you're a map geek like I am, it's got a lot of other things. You could look it up by species, but you can find any species in the United States and its native distribution. So try to plant plants that are within their native distribution. I'm going to talk a little bit about some citizen science projects other than Monarch Watch. I mentioned Journey North. That's where you go to report sightings of monarchs. And also a very important group of people are Monarch Joint Venture. And Monarch Joint Venture has a list of all of these different citizen science projects on their website. And they produce a lot of different brochures, including information about milkweed, information about rearing monarchs, when to mow. They have a great deal of resources that are all vetted by scientists like Dr. Chip Taylor, Karen Oberhauser in Minnesota, and a lot of other people who are on this in this group. So I'm going to go through some of these. The Monarch Joint Venture is the one I'm talking about, and this is one really interesting website here that I send a lot of people to when they have questions about tropical milkweed. So the Q&A about tropical milkweed is a really popular one for me to send to people when they're talking about that. And Journey North, you can go in there and you can report sightings of all kinds of things like hummingbirds and robins and monarch butterflies. And then this citizen science project is tracking the prevalence of a parasite in monarch butterflies. It's a very small microorganism that is easily detected on adult butterflies. So they send people free testing kits. And if you help them with their research, then they will eventually publish their findings and you'll be part of actual scientific research, as you will if you participate in our tagging program. So what's going on with the monarchs? Why are monarch butterflies declining? This map that you're seeing here is a map of the, you can see the Great Lakes there, but west of all of that is the original span of the tallgrass prairie ecosystem. The tallgrass prairie ecosystem is the most endangered ecosystem in the world. And it's also one of the most under-recognized ecosystems as far as its importance in keeping our climate and our environment clean, and a lot of people think about trees when they think about oxygen production and CO2 consumption, but the tall grass prairie ecosystem is actually very, very efficient at doing both of those things. So you can see the original tall grass prairie was a vast expanse, and now we have less than 1%, and most of that actually is in my home state of Kansas. You can see right there through the eastern part of Kansas is a dark green patch. That's the Flint Hill region. The reason that that area was not plowed up and used for agriculture is because of the limestone deposits in the rocks were too difficult to get through with the original plow system. And so now that our plows have gotten more efficient and we're getting rid of some of those rocks in the soil, we're seeing more and more of that area being degraded. Once a prairie is plowed, it is no longer capable of functioning as a virgin prairie. The other thing that we often think about in Mexico is deforestation. Deforestation, it acts as a way for the weather events to more heavily impact monarch butterflies. And you can see this is another overhead view of one of the colonies in Mexico. The forests in Mexico are called the Oyamel forest. It's a very specific type of fir tree that they roost in. And they come there by the millions every year. As you can see in this photograph, up to the very edge of that Oyamel forest, there have been people using that land as agriculture. And it's really not the best for agricultural soil. So keeping those forests intact is really important. Unfortunately, the value of the trees is very high. So they need those trees for lumber for various reasons. And protection of these areas is quite a struggle. And one of the things I'm going to talk about here is farming. So why should conservationists have a positive interest in farming? According to Wendell Berry, there are lots of reasons, but the plainest is conservationists eat. I would also add that conservationists drive cars and fly in airplanes and use energy. So we're here looking at a 2002 soybean field, and this was a common occurrence in soybean fields across the Midwest for the soybeans to have milkweed plants in them. Karen Oberhauser, who I mentioned earlier, who's part of the Monarch joint venture group, she and John Pleasance measured the productivity of monarch butterflies in plants, on the plants in the fields, and found that they were actually more productive. They produced more adult butterflies than they did in areas like CRP land, Conservation Reserve Program land, or native prairies even. This is a cornfield. The previous one was a soybean field, and there were a lot of common milkweed plants in these fields up until the point when we started to see the use of genetically modified crops. Now, this is the percent of soy, corn, sorghum, and wheat in Kansas between 2007 and 2017. So we got about a 10-year span of the land use in Kansas. And the reason I'm bringing this up is because this is actually quite a diverse set of crops, and the diversity is important. Wheat, in fact, is a crop that is not genetically modified to tolerate some of the pesticides that we're using on the plants. This is what Iowa looks like. So Iowa is nearly 100% of the crops that are in Iowa, nearly 100% of it are either corn or soy. So you're looking at a lower diversity of cropland. And this is, and I'll explain a little bit more. I'm afraid my slides are a little out of order here to explain what the genetic modifications are on these plants, but this is the increase in use of those plants over the course of time between 2000 and 2014. You can see nearly, over 90% of all these crops are genetically modified. So they're genetically modified to tolerate Roundup, which is commonly referred to as glyphosate. Glyphosate doesn't kill the monarchs directly, but it does kill those plants that are in the fields. So we're looking at a host plant that's in a field that's producing more monarchs than it would if it was not in the field. And this systemic herbicide kills all of the plants in the field. And so what you end up with is a monoculture of just corn or just soybeans. Now, like I said earlier, they don't really use genetically modified crops in wheat. Wheat is not genetically modified yet. However, it has been used as a desiccant. The glyphosate is used as a desiccant in order to cut back on the amount of guesswork in when their crops will dry out so that they can harvest them. So what is all that corn used for? I'm going to focus on this orange part here. Today's corn crop is mainly used for biofuels and animal feed. So we're talking about two particular items in the ecosystem, in the ecosystem of humans that we actually all use. We almost all need that biofuel to function as a society. We're pretty heavily dependent on it, and we need to start thinking about where the biofuels are used and how we as individuals are contributing to that use of the biofuels. So are we buying local meat rather than stuff that has to be brought in by semi-trucks? How much meat are we consuming? That kind of thing. So, here again is another example of how much of those corn crops are being used for things that are not food-based, really, directly. We're not consuming the food. And this is an example of how soybeans are used. So soybean is also used greatly for animal feed and biofuels and things like that. It does have a higher end, 13.6% of all soybeans that are produced are used for human consumption. Let's skip that. Also, we're going to see, because of a lot of different political things going on in the country, we're going to see an increase in the biofuel consumption and an increase in the amount of cropland that is being used for that. So that occurred between 2008 and 2011, and a total of 23,680,000 acres were converted to cropland during that time. So we're seeing a lot of monarch habitat that's being used up. And also this glyphosate has been increasing dramatically since 1992. Now, I think you might remember back on unfortunately my mouse has disappeared, so I can't show you. Back on that previous slide of the migration, the upper Midwest Corn Belt was an area where a lot of monarchs were coming from. But unfortunately, a lot of that area is being treated with this plant herbicide that knocks back anything that's in the crop fields. So you can see this direct connection between our consumption of these energy sources and food sources and how it's impacting the monarch butterfly. Also, if you look at climate change and what is mostly producing the global emissions that are contributing to global warming, transportation, energy, and agriculture. Those are all three things that are contributing to global warming. So this climate change is contributing to an unfavorable breeding conditions in the summer, unfavorable migratory weather, and unfavorable overwintering weather, all causing monarchs to have a bit of trouble completing that miraculous cycle that they are involved in. So let's look at our own lawns. One of the things that I like to do is to bring it back to you, the person who is capable of making decisions about how you use your resources in your area. Now, I like to talk about the history of lawn care because I think it really points to how people in the United States have conceptualized the importance of lawn and how lawn has become a status symbol for America. And one of the things I want you to notice here, in 1947, there was a man named Levitt who created a bunch of communities called Levittown. Levittown, New York, Levittown, Pennsylvania, and everyone there was promised a lawn. And his sons and he were also involved in producing some of the lawn care for those areas. The only thing is that you could not actually live there, and I added the parentheses there. You could not live there if you were white. If you were not white, sorry, you could not live there if you were black. You couldn't live there if you were Jewish. And so I think it's really interesting to think of the connotations here about our perception of what it means to own a lawn. And this began way back in the 1800s when people started looking at different ways to manicure their environment so that it looked more and more like this prestigious. We started using, in 1915, we started using pesticides on our crops and our plants. The invention of different implements for caring for our lawns. Can you imagine using a reel mower on that property? It's pretty expansive. And the understanding that we had of our connection between the environment and what it meant to own property. So it's here, Abraham Levitt, the man who created all those Levitt towns, said no single feature of a suburban residential community contributes as much to the charm and beauty of the individual home and locality as a well-kept lawn. So we're looking at the invention, basically, of food deserts for all of our pollinators, including monarch butterflies. And we're also introducing chemicals to those ecosystems that do not contribute to the health and well-being of those organisms. And we kept moving on and on. Look at the personal protective equipment on that particular individual who's getting rid of that dandelion. And then in 1962, Rachel Carson wrote Silent Spring, and you probably are mostly familiar with this. And she said the treatment of agricultural lands with herbicides doubled in the decade following 1949, totaling 53 million acres in 1959. So we're talking about this expansion of this idea of basically creating monocultures everywhere that have no real value for pollinators. The chemical weed killers are a bright new toy, she said. And what are the needs of our wildlife? We don't need they don't need monocultures. They need biodiversity. They need to be in and around other organisms so that they can find each other and mate. They need connection to each other, not the fragmentation that we provide by creating these large expanses of habitat that they can't use. And they need native plants. They need native plants that are going to feed their young. So when you do that kind of thing, these are the kinds of organisms that you start seeing in your gardens. This was taken at the Monarch Waystation here on campus in the middle of pretty much food desert all around us. This was a friend of mine's garden. Her backyard had a snake in it. And a lot of people just think, oh, we need to kill those snakes and get them out of here. But really, if we are hoping to provide an environment that is safe for insects, we're also going to provide an environment that's safe for other organisms that we may just not quite like as much, but they really are important to our environment. So one of the things that Monarch Watch has done is we've started a Bring Back the Monarch campaign. And as you can see, over the course of time, we've distributed a lot of milkweed plants. And we have nurseries in 5 different locations. Feel free, as I mentioned before, to donate to Monarch Watch if you're so inclined so that you can help us with our programs. But one of the things that I mentioned before that we do is we have a free Milkweed for Schools and Nonprofits grant. And these are the types of interactions that the kids are having with their environment when they start building these gardens. Their teachers are starting to include the gardens in their curriculum, and this one happens to be also a Monarch Waystation. And there are other things that we bring into our garden that we may think of as pests, but they're actually native insects. And this one, as you can see, is doing something we call skeletonizing a milkweed plant. This is a milkweed tussock moth. It can only consume milkweed, and you can see those bright orange and black coloration, just like with a monarch butterfly's wings. As well as this one, this is eating a plant called squirrel's milkweed, Asclepias verticillata. We also have milkweed beetles, swamp milkweed beetles that are specific to swamp milkweed. With small milkweed bugs and large milkweed bugs. This one, the small milkweed bug is in the foreground and the large milkweed bug is in the background. They look a lot to me like box elder bugs, if you're familiar with those. They consume the seeds of the milkweed. That's why you'll often find them on seed pods. And then we have a non-native species that I mentioned that I would show you earlier. This is the oleander aphid. And look closely at that group of aphids. Some of them are darkened. Those are actually aphids that have been parasitized by a wasp called an aphidious wasp. So those wasps are actually helping us out by taking out some of those aphids. Once you start to see those on your plants, then you might want to cut back a little bit on the squishing of the aphids to see if maybe you can increase the population of aphidious wasps. And I think that I am about done. So I'm going to go ahead and take questions for those of you who have them. And Connor, I believe, has those questions.
Yep. Yeah, that was fantastic. That was great. And anybody that does have questions, please feel free to submit them in either the chat bar at the bottom or in the Q&A function that's built in. There's a few questions there, but I'll let some more people submit them. But yeah, that was a great talk. Really informative. A lot of new information for me personally. The only part I didn't like was a giant spider on the screen.
Yeah, sorry about that. But you know what's really interesting is that a lot of people, when they see that, they think, oh my gosh, the spiders are killing the monarch butterflies, and we need to do something to stop them. But one of the things that I like to stress is that we're not trying to save monarch butterflies at the expense of other things that might depend on them for survival. We do not want to go killing the beautiful garden spider because it ate a monarch butterfly, because it's an indication when we see that it's eating a monarch butterfly, it's an indication that there are enough butterflies in the system for them to eat something. So the fact that that butterfly randomly flew into the web is just an indicator that the population might be doing better than you would think.
Yeah, I just prefer all those spiders to be outside, which that one was, which is great.
Yes, absolutely.
But let's see. So a question we have here is there a butterfly plant that deer won't eat up?
That's a really good question. So deer and other grazers do eat milkweed plants. It's widely believed that milkweed is so toxic that it will kill cattle. Unfortunately, that's a misconception. I was at a talk on a native prairie in Kansas where they were talking about how they knew that the prairie was coming back after heavy grazing because the milkweed was showing up again. And that is an indicator that the cattle are actually consuming the milkweed, and to no ill effect. The milkweed that causes problems is in the desert Southwest, and milkweed that is bundled up in hay in large quantities and given to cattle or horses that have no other option, they may get poisoned by that hay. So to answer the question, one of the things that is interesting about milkweed is that it is adapted to grazing, and one of adaptations is that it produces more bitter toxins the more that it is eaten. It actually has a defense mechanism against the grazing because it's the milkweed's its strategy, evolutionarily speaking, is to produce these toxins to keep butterflies from eating it, to keep all of those hosts that are on it from eating it. The butterfly and the milkweed are in constant struggle against each other. there's a really interesting book by Anurag Agrawal. He is a scientist at Cornell. Anurag is his first name. Agrawal is his last name. If you want to look up that book, it's an entire book about that struggle between monarchs and milkweed, and how they're so the grazers may eventually stop eating the milkweed if it's given a chance to be eaten a few times and grow back.
Okay, yeah, because on Long Island here, the deer are countless. There's so many, and because there's no
Yeah.
natural predators here to deal with them, so it's a common thing where people will spend, who knows how much money developing their garden, and then a family deer come through and eat the entire thing.
Yeah,
So,
one of the things that can be used to deter that, you can get different things at hardware stores and garden centers that are deterrents.
mhm.
One of them is coyote urine pellets,
Yeah,
and that may help, but it also washes away in the rain.
yeah.
So,
Let's see. So another question. This is actually from my director of the museum, Tom Edmonds. He said, "Thank you for a very focused presentation on monarchs, as well as a broader look at our changing environment." It's not really a question, but a thank you.
you're very welcome.
Let's see. Here we have
I just like to try to make people think about the ways that we are acting in our environment. So if you have the ability to create a garden, if you have the ability to reduce your yard size and put more habitat in it, that is great. But there are also other things that we can think about, as in maybe consuming less meat, or thinking about where our food sources are coming from. Those are going to benefit not just monarchs, but other pollinators as well.
Gotcha. From somebody else, let's see. My name is Laura Lever, and I live in Noyak, which is here on Long Island. I have lots of milkweed and other native plants. I have some Asclepias syriaca.
So that's common milkweed.
Okay, and some Asclepias tuberosa, I believe a different type of milkweed.
That's butterfly weed, yeah.
Okay, available right now. If you'd like them, you're welcome to dig them out in the fall. I'll have tons of seed also. She provided her email and her phone number, and thanks. The deer have eaten mine in the past, and this year the plants in the front have been left alone. Go figure. So I guess Laura's advising other people that if they are interested in getting their own milkweed, she can provide some. So if anyone else is interested,
Awesome.
feel free to contact me. I'll share the info. I don't want to put that out there because we're going to put
Sure.
this on YouTube later. So I don't want to put your
Yeah.
phone number out there. But
One of the things that we have to be careful about when we're digging up milkweeds is that we make sure that we dig very deeply. As I was mentioning before, prairie plants are really good at sequestering carbon, and one of the ways they do it is in a really deep root system. And milkweeds are no exception to that rule. They have a super deep root system, and so when you're digging those plants up, try to get as much of the root as you possibly can. The fall or spring is a good time to do it because they're going dormant. All of the native milkweed plants that we have in the upper northeastern part of the United States, where you are going to completely die back in this late fall. Their leaves will fall off and they'll look dead. But they aren't dead, they've just gone underground, and that's a good time to dig them up because they're kind of sleeping.
Okay. So yeah, so if anybody does want some, maybe 2 months would be a good time to harvest that out of Laura's yard. But let's see. If there's no other questions, I just want to say again, thank you for doing this talk. This was fantastic. A really great learning experience for everybody here. And yeah, thank you.
You're welcome. Thanks for having me.
No problem. Have a good day, everybody. Bye.